So I finished Irosekai, and what I felt on it kind of reminded me of something else like I wrote about, but ended up shelving. Basically, it was on how I score stuff, and the subsection was how generally people give a more favorable score if it ends well, even if the percentage of what's good is identical to a movie with a poor second half. It's more of a talk about people ignoring the faults for the high they're feeling and giving something a 10 when it doesn't really deserve it, kind of thing, right? Anyways, the title is equal parts great and generic. The saving grace is that everything has a pointer that explains why X and Y are that way. I get that just because there's an explanation for it, crap is still crap, but it still softens up the blow of what was happening, what they went with makes sense with the proper context. A lot of my favorite titles kind of have that and handle it pretty well. It just until you get there, these sections of Irosekai are really generic to me and massively boring. The school section, the beach section, the eating section, the dorm section, everything's always the damn same. If the current plot isn't covering the alternate worlds and their characters or the two main characters, Yuma and Shinku, then I'm just bored. This one will cut off pretty early for the spoilers because most of everything I liked was in the finale. Funny enough, the sections are pretty segmented this time around, but I'll go over the characters first. There's Kana. You meet her pretty early on where she jumps off the lighthouse. That's not a spoiler, by the way, it's like in the synopsis. She's kind of an airhead and wants to be Yuma's wife. She wears some maid attire, and honestly she's kind of annoying to me, but I feel like a huge chunk of it is just like I just don't like her voice. Her voice was actually in a lot of titles I do like, sometimes even my favorite character in the title, but Kana just doesn't do it for me. She has a lot of good scenes, but she was really the main focus in the majority of them anyway. She's just kind of there. Mio's the childhood friend, she's the classic Soon, and her route just works. I feel like there's also going to be a subset of people that really dislike how it ended, but I liked it a lot. Though it kind of fucks up the flow, but I'll get to that in the spoilers. Kyo's another airhead and also a NEET. She spends most of her time playing all these types of games. Tsukasa's yet another airhead and that's usually just broke and is working here and there to make some money. She's the most naive of the bunch and more like the mascot than anything else. There's a couple other characters, but the remaining important characters are like the two leads, Yuma and Shinku, and Yuzu, who's basically like Yuma's boss. It's always apparent that she's like a cut above the rest and knows more than what she leads on, but her lazy and like prankster nature throws off Yuma a lot. Yuma has a horrible memory and forgets anything he deems unimportant, so anything he deems important has to be written in this book. The book contains Shinku, who can't be perceived by anyone except Yuma. With her help, Yuma can heal anybody instantly in a trade for like some of his memories. It's a deus ex machina, but it's kept under control considering you can't do like crazy outrageous things like reviving people from the dead. It's just like, oh yeah, I can heal you. They call themselves liberators, and the gist is that randomly people get messaged by God and they vanish soon after, so they try to save those people if the victims ask them to. Unfortunately, this is kind of put to the side more often than not throughout the VN, but it's always like the highlight when they get back to it. If you ever read Tokyo Babel, then something like that, where the fights are the highlights and the interim of like the slice of life scenes are either fine or just fucked up the pacing overall. Anyways, with that out of the way, the rights are segmented weirdly. Kana's route is so long that it can fit Mio, Kyo, and Tsukasa's all inside. And that's mainly because a good chunk of that is handling other characters that are used to as like similarities for her stuff. So she's the only one that gets that treatment, but it's not like her route is stupidly long anyway. It's that Kyo and Tsukasa felt like it took around 2 hours or 3 hours long, and Mio is maybe 5 or 6. Kan is what's considered the first route. Mio and Kyo reflect back onto Kan's route, but you could technically do Mio's route first, depending if you prefer to have some leading questions or you just want the references. Technically, there's a tiny bit with Tsukasa and Kyo's route, so you can technically leave Kyo for the end. But in the finale, they confirm on what the path normally is, but it could be like a little Busters type of thing where it knows what you did, so it just reflects on that. Anyways, you can say that the common route took like 30%, Kana is maybe another 15, and the other 3 took the other 15. And that's basically me saying the final route is actually pretty fucking large. Up until this point, I was not having a favorable outlook on this VN. It had its good moments, it had some bad moments, but overall, a lot of things feeling standard. And honestly, that was worse for me than it just being straight out bad, because at least I can make fun of it then. Honestly, it felt like it was wasting its time with the characters when they had so many avenues available with like the alternate worlds and their characters and what Yuma's trying to do across all of these. Finale extends every important character. Anything that you thought that could be stupid is explained and honestly explained well enough to the point that you can shovel the complaints away. The plot is written well, the pacing is great, and I don't think it ever stopped being engaging. It goes through the steps properly, it never felt like ending was dragging on, and this is where I can see why like, oh, this is why the VN is rated highly. It just sucks that I had to wait so long to get here. Overall, the VN itself isn't that long, but you have to go through a chunk before hitting what makes the title great. But who knows, if you haven't read like a decent amount of VNs, then maybe even this generic shit is actually really good for you. It's very delightful, who knows. For me, it's like, it's tired by now. The music is catchy, the art is pretty, whilst the OP isn't all that well designed compared to like Memoria, it's still quite fun. I'm giving the common route around like a 6, and that's mostly considering the penultimate chapter and the chapter around Shinku was really well done. Otherwise, it'd be like close to a 5 because I was just bored. I kind of had like a lot of issues with it. Now, anytime I spent time in like the alternate worlds or what Yuma was doing, it was like a 7 or maybe even 8. Kana's route was fine, and I had a lot of fun with Mio's route, but the other two were really too short to put any thought into it. The finale is pretty much a 9, so as a whole I'm putting it as an 8. Maybe with time and forgetting about like the monotonous parts, it'll feel like a 9 again, right? But who knows? So I'm at the spoilers now, and that'll cover a couple of the routes in the finale. Technically, you can do Kana's route whenever, it won't affect the path thing all that much. The purpose of putting her first, outside of it being like the more fleshed out route, is because it covers what's wrong with her, and the purpose on Ayumu and the character called Renya. Renya is Kyo's brother, but also Ren's dad. Ayumu is someone that has around like the same feeling as like Yuma, and technically his goal is to save Kana due to Kana taking care of him when they were younger. Except Ayumu was a cat back then. It's a whole thing. It's brought back up in Mio's route, but it just in the way that it's telling like the readers like, hey, Kana's still gonna be fine, and he doesn't need Yuma to save her and that shit. It's fine. If you don't do Kana's route first, it just feels like, oh yeah, there's something that I pointed there. It's like, oh, Ayumu's gonna be important for Kana's route. That's like the main spoiler, which is nothing. It's almost at the same level saying like, oh, you have to do Tsukasa's route before Kyo, just because you learned that the town really cares about Tsukasa and Kyo's route. It's a surface level stuff that doesn't really matter all that much. So it's more that you get out more out of your time with Kana, because you might be peeved with how short Tsukasa and Kyo's routes are if you do them first. But it's like otherwise like, yeah, whatever. You can choose whatever. Anyways, for a while I kind of assumed Kana's voice was fake, and it was a way to get to like endear Yuma or make him remember who she was, in the sense that it was her voice when she was young, and it's considering that what was happening with her, she was like mentally kind of stuck due to her condition. And once it was remedied and she got everything that she knew back and learned everything in one go, I thought how she acted and her voice would drop. And I guess how she acted already shifted midway, but her voice sadly stayed the same, which is kind of funny in a way because her VAs also did like a what was it, Aristotle and the Aosinki thing, which, you know, she didn't have a lot of scenes, but I still liked her a lot in that one, so it's kind of weird. In Mio's route, it ended up being that she wasn't the same person Yuma knew at the start. A lot of shit happened, and this was another Mio from the alternate world. OG Mio's parents were killed, and she took this Mio's parents. Technically, it was a request for a few days, and then she just got Shigure to lock down the path to that world, so Mio just got screwed, or this Mio got screwed. And I forgot if I ever mentioned how they go through other worlds, and it's through this basement thing with a clock in there. And then, like, Mio's ending happens to be like, oh, she was able to go back, but something's happened, and then the clock got screwed up, and how she can't go back home anymore, or back to Yuma's home anymore. So years pass, and eventually Yuma and Mio see each other, even though they're not in the same worlds. This goes back to the initial allegory of, like, the ocean and sky, and how they're always close but never joining. It's like their whole thing. Honestly, I quite like the route. It's not as short as the next two. It has a couple things going on, and even like the slice of life stuff was pretty fun. Though I guess a huge part of that was like Mio playing the Zatome, but that was secretly like a Kusoge. It was funny. If you're not a fan of it, it would drag a lot for you, but you know, it was fine for me. I'm skipping what happened to the next two routes and just jumping to the finale. They're not important really. The finale is basically a retcon of what was going on so far. It's just like a different popular title from like 10 years by now, where the sequel just tells you that, hey, the protag handled all of the issues, even though it doesn't really make sense with some of them. And that's pretty much the case here too. It says he saved one in each year, starting with Kana and ending with Tsukasa. And the routes that we did aren't really those routes, because like, well, let's say in Mio's route, Ayuma's still there. He'd already be gone if Kana went first. Either way, Mio's route would fuck it all up because the clock was broken in her route anyway. So Tsukasa and Kyo's route would not work either. Not to mention that Mio's route ended up with him waiting years to the point everybody already left the dorm anyway. So like, none of this makes sense. It's just one of those things like, yeah, just don't worry about the routes you actually did because they don't matter. It's more of the context of what you get from them, and that's it. So yeah, it doesn't really matter. It's just saying that like, oh yeah, he resolved everything, right? And the premise behind that is because like, oh, the world is a replica. It's the colorful world. This was set through a lot of hoops, but the gist of it is that Yumo is the current manager of like the library they always mention, where every person becomes a book, and then he sits down with the more downtrodden ones and then help them with making a new story for them. He wanted to know what levels personally, so he escaped the library and went to Earth. This fucked up the system, and now people are just vanishing all over the place instead of just once per year. And even then it was a misconception because they weren't kidnapped or anything. It was like they already accomplished their wish or their dream, or they're really downtrodden and they just want to give up, and they're like, alright, yeah, come with me and I'll help you out. Sometimes it became weirdly religious. I liked it a lot, but I assume some people were just like, oh, why is this here? Anyways, the town is pretty much dead. Once he gets there, he meets Shinku, who then introduces him to like Kana and Mio. Tsukasa, Kyo, and Ayumu are already taken. It's the reason why their routes are so short. He just has less background info to fill out their stories, but I'll get to that in a bit. So the basis is that like, oh, he now understands that the library is screwy, so he's going back. This is speeding through the plot. It makes a lot more sense in the end, but Suzu helps him out to create this fake world where he can save the traumas that the kids have, considering that was also one of like Shinku's wishes. And a lot of it is like, he feels a lot of this is his fault because he left, because if he did not, then they would have all these chances to do everything they wanted already. So it's like, oh, he's sacrificing himself because he kind of sacrificed the world to do his shit. It's a cyclical shit. It works fine. I think it's done well. While on the flip side, he has to throw away his initial wish since once complete he'll go back to the library as a book instead of the entity that can manage everything. The idea is that the library holds a lot of crap that power-hungry people want. So since he left, the door was wide open and I felt like that was kind of cartoonishly evil and I don't think that was needed to be a thing. All those entities left once he got back, but a more practical thing would be like, oh, the library has some level automation to it. It's just that the automation was done poorly and it's just doing shit for its job and the thresholds before running an action were too low. So any little event would fire the steps to take the humans away and that's what was happening. And what they did still works, but it does feel like something that was put there just to explain it away instead of being like an integral part of the plot. And I'm finally at the last point, and it's going back to the short routes, or rather the idea anything you thought was weird or dumb has a reason for it. Why are the routes short? He only knows what Shinko told about them. Why is Kana so much longer than the rest? Because he spent the most time with her. Why does he forget everything unless he writes it down? Because he's been around for countless years. Yeah, I think it's a couple millennia, and it's just like a safety mechanism for his sanity. Why is Suzu always messing around? It's kind of some hazing for what Yuma was doing to her world, so she cares about, like, you know, she cares about him, but something that she probably won't drop even though like none of it matters anymore. It's just kind of fun for her to do it. Why does he use his healing powers all the damn time for the most mundane injuries? Seriously, the amount of times he healed Kana was crazy. It happened throughout like the whole common route. It's like, oh, how many times are you gonna erase memories just to heal like a fucking thing she felt that she fell down? It'll be fine. Like, you know, give an hour. It'll be fine. What the fuck? And it's because he wants to wipe his memories of Shinku. He's always afraid that he'll revert back to his original wish of wanting someone to love again. And the more he forgets, the easier his decision will be after he resolves the rest of the issues from like the rest of the cast, right? Because getting his own wish was something he refused to do considering how much damage he was causing just being there. Honestly, I was assuming something alongside the lines of him going back and just taking Shinku to the library after like a year or whatever. All in all, I had a lot of fun when the plot revolved around Yuma or Shinku. Tsukasa and Kyo's routes could have been removed and just reworked into something like, oh, be more involved in the common route, or having like little arcs in there, or maybe being part of Mio's and Kana's route as like a little thing, because maybe their words weren't as big as the other ones, right? Even the cover images only consist of Shinku, Mio, and Kana's. Like, what the fuck? Why were they there? I get what they were going for, and not having anything for them will just have like a different subset of people complaining, like, why didn't they have routes? So you're never gonna accomplish everybody's thing. It's just one of those things like, if you're gonna do it, then do it well, and if you're not, it's like, alright, whatever. Might as well not be there, I guess. And it's to the point, it's like, you can remove those two characters and not a lot would actually change. Like at most, you would have to change like one thing in the common route. And it's easily done because there's another character that does that as well. So it's like, yeah, what's the point?